This podcast is a quest for well-being, a quest for a meaningful life through the exploration of fundamental truth. Enlightening ideas, insights on physical, mental, and spiritual health. The inspiration is love. The aspiration is to awaken new ways of thinking that can lead us to a new way of being well. Welcome to Body, Mind, and Soul Healing Conversations.
Experience does not come with a label or name tag pinned to its lapel announcing what it is. The dance of light and color in the evening sky does not say, "I'm a sunset." The clear, sparkling liquid racing down the mountainside doesn't announce to us, "I'm a river." No, it is we who supply the labels. Experience arrives as it is, presenting as various qualities, characteristics, attributes, and textures. And those very qualities that make up what we call experience also comes with no narrative attached. They arrive naked and unadorned by any ideas we might entertain about them. Now, most of us have experienced the way in which certain moments, such as listening to music, making love, or seeing some awesome display of nature, are beyond the reach of words. We recognize that such moments are simply too vast, too rich, and too multifaceted to be captured by any of our descriptive frameworks. But as it turns out, this is the case with all experience. We search for love, for happiness, for well-being, for peace. At times, we feel as if we found whatever it is we're aspiring to realize, experiencing a moment where all seems unimaginably well, a moment of great vitality, happiness, or ease. And then it slips away, doesn't it? For this is the nature of experience, to disappear no sooner than it has appeared. Experiences always come, and they always go. It's unavoidable. The waves of perception are temporary, rising up and then returning from whence they came, only to be replaced by the next perceptual wave that appears. And no matter how hard we may try to sustain those states that we typically equate with happiness and peace, we're simply unable to do so. At every turn, we find ourselves faced with the stark reality that despite our best efforts to obtain and then hold in place our positive states of mind, we are powerless to realize any kind of actual permanence or continuity because discontinuity is all there is. The river of experience never holds still. There are no frozen frames in the movie that is life, even if language gives us the impression that there are discrete moments with clear beginnings and ends. Life never remains the same, but is always on the move. Now, conventionally, we equate well-being with particular types of experience. We believe that happiness is dependent upon the flow of life looking a certain way, comfortable, happy, and imagine that when it appears different, uncomfortable and unhappy, well-being is somehow absent. But what if there's another order of well-being altogether? One discovered not in the usual way we label our experiences, but rather in the flow of experiencing itself. What if well-being could be found not in particular, seemingly discrete perceptual states that are by nature fleeting, but in the continuous flow of perceiving itself, a flow that is by its very nature uninterrupted? Valeria interviews John Aston, the author of This Extraordinary Moment, Moving Beyond the Mind to Embrace the Miracle of What Is. John Aston is the author of 4 books exploring the nature of reality. Too Intimate for Words, This Is Always Enough, Searching for Rain in a Monsoon, and his most recent, This Extraordinary Moment, New Harbinger, 2018. He is also a singer, songwriter, and recording artist, having produced 7 CDs of original, spiritual, contemplative music. In addition to his writing and music, John is a professor of counseling and clinical psychology at Santa Clara and Notre Dame de Namur universities. He holds a PhD in health psychology and is an internationally acclaimed scholar in the field of mind-body medicine. His teaching and research focusing on the applications of meditative, contemplative practices in psychology and healthcare. Here is the interview with John Aston.
In your own words, who is John Aston?
I am. Gosh, what an impossible question. I'm so many things. In any moment, I might be something else. But in terms of my different things I'm up to in this life, I'm a psychologist. I'm a writer. I'm a songwriter. I'm, I guess some would call me a spiritual teacher. And those different hats that I wear are all very much kind of integrated into my work, and I'm expressing and sharing very similar things through each of those roles that I play. So, and I'm also a father, and a lover of existence, I sometimes like to say.
I love that. Never heard it that way. Thank you. So I have a few warm-up questions before we talk about some of the topics in your book. This extraordinary moment, moving beyond the mind to embrace the miracle of what is. My first warm-up question is, what is life to you, John?
I sometimes say that there's sort of you could say there's kind of two approaches to spirituality, broad categories. The one that we're most familiar with is sort of what I would call kind of life improvement, improving our experience, improving our circumstances, and which is wonderful. You know, it's a wonderful thing to try to endeavor to do. And there's another kind, though, that's really not very common in my travels, but it's really what a lot of my work is fundamentally about, which is exploring, not so much focusing on life improvement, but actually exploring what life actually is. Like, what is this thing we call life? That we are obviously experiencing what could be called life, the sense that we are alive, but what is that actually? And I would say, to come back to your question, like, what is it? I would say I don't actually know. That it's a fathomless mystery, ultimately, what life is. And that is, in a nutshell, the essence of what my work is about, is exploring what in fact life is, what experience is. So,
wow, that's that this is it's something, right? Life is something we just don't. Maybe we can't express, but we know we are alive, or we are here. Like, we're talking now, and this is happening, but it's like an interesting dream. So if this is true and this moment exists and we are speaking now, this is sort of something, an experience, whatever we call it, what do you think would be the opposite of this?
It's interesting. My consciousness I can't conceive of an opposite to existence, we could say to being, because whatever we might conceptualize as some opposite, like non-existence, well, that would be something that we're calling non-existence, calling non-being, and that would be another expression of life that we're calling another expression of reality. So, in a sense, I don't sense there is an opposite to life. There just is life. There's just my favorite word these days is this. There's this. Call it reality. Call it existence. Call it pure. Call it being. But it has no opposite.
Right. So I guess my next question has to do with what You talk about, you write about the experience of the moment, the experience of what this is. What is it? Like, what is the experience of this in this very moment?
It seems like a natural point to kind of say a little bit about, you know, how I see my work in this sense, because I would say that we could say, as you were saying a moment ago, that it appears that something's going on here. We call it experience. We could call it existence. Experience is also a word that seems very apt somehow. And so if we say that experience is occurring, something is present, and then whatever that is that's present, um, life or the intelligence of life, consciousness, whatever you want to call it, is rendering that in some way. It's interpreting that in some way. It's making sense of that. It's putting what's going on. It's putting this, the, the mystery of this moment, of the mystery of experience. It's putting it into some framework of understanding. It's describing it. It's labeling it. It's conceptualizing it. It's categorizing it. It's defining it in all the different ways that we do that from moment to moment. So even and a lot of that is occurring, we could say, implicitly. Like it's almost like if you close your eyes and then you open your eyes, there's suddenly what you would call a room. If you're sitting in a room that's filled with all sorts of objects, which you immediately already have names for. You already know you've already, in a sense, interpreted where you are and what's your environment consists of to some degree, right? So, but what's really amazingly a remarkable thing to begin to explore is how, and really what the book that you mentioned earlier that I wrote, my last book, is about, is exploring the ways in which our actual direct immediate experience doesn't actually map on that exactly to what we think is going on. In fact, it deviates in some pretty astonishing ways from what we could call kind of conventional notions of reality, conventional ideas we're kind of carrying around mostly unconsciously about what's going on here. I think one of the simplest, and I think also maybe most powerful, one of the most powerful examples of that is that the way we conceive of the world and talk about the world, think about the world, is in terms of things having some amount of duration, some amount of stability, some amount of continuity. So, and of course, that's what enables us seemingly to name things and describe things, and we think of ourselves and other people in our lives as kind of having continuity, like they endure over time, right? But when we actually look at experience itself directly, just feel experience, and it doesn't take 20 years on a meditation cushion to see this, I don't believe. We can just look at your experience right now and see that it really doesn't have duration. It's not stable. It's not holding still. It's constantly shifting. It's constantly morphing. It's dynamic. You asked earlier, what is life? And one thing we could say about life is it's alive. It's not static. It's lively. It's dynamic. It's ever changing, right? And so the perceptions that are occurring now, the thoughts, things that we would call thoughts, sensations, feelings, and so on, it's as if they're arising, but their very arising, their very occurrence is also their vanishing and their disappearance. And it's an extraordinary thing to kind of feel that, because it upends in almost across the board everything we've come to believe life, in a sense. And discovering that also has a lot of implications also, which we can explore together. But that's one, if we just feel, in a sense, our experience, which is my favorite kind of practice to suggest to people, is just simply feel what's here, rather than merely conceive of what's here, but just to feel the presence of what's here. You can begin to recognize that the presence of what's here is slipping away in every instant. And what's so amazing though too is that it's slipping away, and at the same time there is a sense of a kind of continuity of experiencing. So it's like the moment is slipping away, passing away, dissolving, like liquidating, in every instant. And yet there's a sense of a presence, a here-ness that never goes away. So it's kind of very paradoxical. It's like something's always here, and yet what's here is always changing, and yet always here, always changing, and yet always here. That's just a really a remarkable thing to see that and to feel the reality of that.
Yes. Yes. Yes, 1,000 times. That makes me think what prevents us to see what we can describe as magic is thinking. So it seems like we are somehow obsessed with thinking, or maybe thinking is obsessed with us. I don't know. Either way, that made me think the way you talk, trying to describe this, which is very paradoxical. The here now, but it's not. It's always changing, but at the same time, it never went anywhere. It's always here.
Right. There's a sense of a constancy of it.
Yeah.
And yet it's very, I mean, in a way, you can't really determine. This is, I would say, kind of the final conclusion to, you ask, well, what life is, at the beginning, which is, we could say, what is experience? And that you can't pin it down. You can't get to the bottom of what it is. In a sense, it has no bottom. And you can discover that by feeling its nature, by feeling into it, and discovering that it's too slippery, it's too vast, it's too endless in its complexity and in its detail and in its and any piece that you explore and you look at and experience. I mean, it's very. And you this can be seen, and it's a very. I tell my students, I also teach grad students in psychology about this stuff, and we were just talking the other night about this, and I was using the example of the metaphor of impressionist painting, that from one perspective, and this is an important point I think to make also about my work, which is that notion that you can't get to the bottom of what things are, you can't ultimately pin down what this is. We could say is one perspective on reality, one perspective on life or experience. But it's not the only one. It just happens to be a very powerful one, and one that's largely kind of seems to be sort of unrecognized by most of us. But because from one perspective, we can say, well, I absolutely know, that I'm looking at my computer's in front of me, and well, I know what that is. It's a computer, right? And if I'm feeling sad, I know what that is. I have a name for it. It's sadness. Or if I'm feeling joy, what I would call joy, well, I know exactly what that is. It's joy, and it's not sadness. It's the same thing with flavors of food. Like I know what chocolate is. It's chocolate, and I know what vanilla is, and it's not chocolate. And so this is this very kind of curious thing about the full kind of wildly rich range of human experience that we encounter in the course of the moments of our lives, with all this incredible diversity of texture and flavor and qualities, right, to what we're encountering moment to moment. And the paradox is it seems as if we can identify those differences. We can make these distinctions from one thing from another, and from sadness as distinct from joy, as I was saying. And yet, when you go to explore what any of those flavors is in its essence, you try to get to, okay, well, what is sadness actually? What is the flavor I'm calling chocolate? It's like, I know exactly what it is. It's chocolate, or it's sadness. But then when you actually go to explore it, you literally come up empty-handed. You cannot arrive at the final conclusion of what it is. And the metaphor that I was starting to mention is that there's several that capture this, but one is the the Impressionist painting, where from one perspective you're looking at the painting of Monet, let's say, and you can see like, oh, well, there it is. It's lilies on the water. One of the famous Monet paintings that he's done, and it's like that's from one perspective. That's exactly what it is. You can see it very clearly. But when you get up closer to the painting, right? So from another perspective, you get really close to the painting, and suddenly it becomes less clear what is actually there. In fact, the image, it becomes very ambiguous, and you see color, you see flashes of, you see paint on a canvas, and it's very much like that with our experience. When you get up, metaphorically speaking, you get up close to experience, you look very carefully at it, what it is, what its nature is, you feel its nature, and suddenly you would think that you would know more about what it is the closer you look, right?
Right. It's the opposite.
But the closer you look,
No
it's
way.
opposite in a sense. Why? Because it's like you discover more and more and more and more about what it is. It's just like a person, like your partner, or your child, or your friend. So you think like, okay, the more time I spend with this person, the closer I am, the closer I look to who they are. I'll finally get to the essence of who that person is, right? But actually, no, you just keep discovering more and more and more. So in a sense, the more you look, the less you know, because you discover that person or yourself or any experience you encounter is like a universe upon universe upon universe of dimensions and aspects and qualities and characteristics that you could never hope to put into some kind of neat and tidy little box, some little definition, some identity, some framework. It's not possible to do that, not ultimately. And that to begin to appreciate that, to see that and appreciate that, one starts to realize how open-ended things are, how indefinable things are, how free everything is from all of the ideas that we have about what things are. Like everything is liberated from all of the notions that we might have about what that thing is. And that to me is what freedom is, the deepest, about realizing that.
I mean, it seems like you're reading my mind too, which is interesting. And you can feel it. It's not a concept. So the more you talk, the more, I feel the freedom. Yeah, whatever we describe as freedom. There's no limits.
Right. It is incredible. Like we think of ourselves as being, we imagine ourselves as definable, and yet if we look, we can see that we're not, that we're already by our very nature, not something that has to be achieved. It's not a freedom that we have to achieve. It's a freedom that's just the case, that it's free. We are free, and everything is free from all notions of what anything actually is, all ideas, all conceptual interpretive frameworks. And there's of course no words for that. It's the whole point. And so it's a very curious thing to be, I mean, I write books about this stuff, which is kind of laughable, right? Because it's like my last book had how many words in it? I don't know, a lot. The constant refrain throughout the book is that this can't be encapsulated with words or concepts or ideas, and yet I try to use words, whether I'm speaking them as I am now or writing them, so that they can maybe evoke a little sense or taste of that indescribability, that inconceivability, that indefinable nature of what's here. And I mentioned earlier that I'm also function as a psychologist and teach college students, graduate students in psychology, and in particular people who are training to be therapists. And even though I'm not a licensed therapist myself, all these explorations and discoveries about how what is here, our experience transcends our ideas about it, has huge, just profound, powerful implications um, for free. It also frees us from all of the, how can I say it? You know, you think about what brings a person, say, to oftentimes to a therapist or maybe a spiritual teacher, where they have some sense of being stuck in something, some aspect of their experience or their life, or they feel as if they're trapped inside of X, Y, or Z identity or experience or circumstance. Um, and so it's so powerful to begin to realize that to see how open-ended everything actually is. And then when you discover that, you begin to get a very strong taste of um, that we're not actually caught in the states of mind and identities that we imagine we're caught in, because those things, they don't hold up under scrutiny as being actually things with concrete boundaries and definitions. It's like being, instead of being something concrete, it's like it's more cloud-like. It's like it's shifting, morphing, indefinability, and it's like, how can you be stuck in that? You're stuck in that. Um, and also the person who imagines him or herself to be stuck in something is also that open-ended, indefinable, cloud-like, ever-changing. Um, yeah, and so that changes things quite a bit.
Yeah, it can change everything, actually. You talk about things that I understand intellectually, but I also things that I experience on a daily basis, not as a practice, but just, yeah, I'm open to it. Whatever life is just beautiful. And I can feel in your words. So it's not in the words, not about the words, it's how they resonate. And that's interesting. Yeah, it resonates true when you talk.
It is. It's a. Yeah. I mean, everything is so mysterious, and language is certainly one of those things. I mean, what is actually even transpiring when we're speaking words to one another? I mean, it's some wild kind of exchange of, like, isn't it something? Like, here we are, we're having a conversation, what we would call a conversation, and we're using words and concepts, right? And there's this back and forth.
Yeah.
But what's actually going on is like this. It's quite something. I mean, it's this marvelous, inexplicable, miraculous. I don't know, what would you call it? A kind of a dance of. I don't know. I don't know how to really describe it, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. It's almost stops
It does.
conversation, conventional conversation.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, and yet, funny enough,
Wow.
it's like, even though, I've been saying all along in our conversation thus far that when you explore this and you come up empty-handed, it's like you can't get to the bottom of what things are. That it's not I mean, I'm talking about a term in Buddhism that I don't mention in my book ever, which is emptiness, because it's a word that just doesn't feel apt somehow. Um, and it feels potentially misleading too, because I think people have a lot of sort of negative associations with the word, because in a way it's much more a sense of a just an unthinkable fullness, really, that is so, you may not be able to pin down what experience is, and yet it's just unimaginably dense in its richness and its vibrancy and its luscious uh, meaningfulness, somehow, is what I would say. And uh, even though I'm throwing words at something that is beyond words, I'm attempting to capture a little bit of the flavor of um, of life itself, in a sense, in its more bare, primal kind of nature at its root, we could say.
It's funny because we often think about life, but we are life itself. So, and that's what I hear when you're talking to me. Is life talking? It's like life itself using sounds of a human
Right.
voice.
Life
But
listen,
it's
that's a conversation, is life listening to itself, life exploring itself, life uh, sort of reveling in itself and tasting itself and um, enjoying itself, actually.
yeah, right, right. So fascinating that we can have this experience. The flavor that you talked about, there's so many flavors in this, the relative reality, and we can get distracted with so many things, so concepts and ideas in our minds. For this experience that is untouched by the human mind in a sense of logical thinking, so I think the closest thing that I can associate with is imagination. It feels really freeing when I'm imagining. And this kind of now, it's like that in a way.
Yeah, I mentioned, before we started our, formal conversation here, recording, that about my being a musician, and so I'm very curious about creativity, and that feels obviously closely linked to imagination, and um, I really feel in a way that um, this, what we were talking about earlier, of kind of like recognizing that things are not actually constrained by these boxes of understanding that we've developed. It kind of, and the liberating nature of that, I believe, as I think you're also suggesting, is that the recognition of that can also free up a kind of more unbounded sort of creativity. And even when you think about, like, um, problem solving, for example, like, um, and it would be way too big a detour to get into right now to talk about what we're facing, this situation that the world's facing right now. um, but you think about, lots of intelligences around the world are trying to figure out how to address this, but how willing are we to, as we bring our different sort of frameworks and maps of understanding to the problem at hand, like how much capacity or willingness is there to um, really open up the conversation, to explore all sorts of possible solutions to it, that maybe that we haven't imagined yet. And sometimes what can happen, or oftentimes, is that when we're when we're when we're kind of living primarily inside of our knowledge of how to proceed with something, right? That's our framework, what we know to be the case. We may be limiting what's possible, in terms of responding in creative, imaginative ways, because we're not actually recognizing um, that our knowledge always represents our knowledge is always limited, because it's put a box around something, as we were saying, that and so I really feel like there is a kind of natural, almost consequence of more and more familiarizing ourselves with this unlimited, indefinable nature of experience, and how that can sort of naturally, sort of, I think, uh, kind of lead to kind of a freeing up of creativity, and this kind of natural genius, I think, that exists,
Mm.
in all of us.
Yes, I agree there. That's a great suggestion. If someone with a lot of power is listening, but often, more often than not, yeah, they don't listen to people. Yeah, that open. They come with these amazing, creative ideas that could solve actually everything. Yeah, systems, they are based on knowledge, and yeah, it feels very much like a prison. When I think about systems, yeah, I think about boxes and a way of thinking that has to be always the same. And is it repetition?
Well, and this is kind of, one of the things that, we, with the human consciousness, creates these frameworks of understanding, generates these maps of what's going on here to try to make sense of it, right? And in just in life in general, in different fields of endeavor and so on, and even in the creative arts, where there's these kind of frameworks of, like, these are the rules, this is the structure that we're operating with, right?
Right.
And
That's true. Yes. Yeah.
those can be certainly useful. I mean, there they are, here they are. You know, we've life has generated these frameworks, and so they have
Mm,
their perspectives that are
right.
valid, you know, from within their own
Yes.
perspectives. But
Yeah.
but but what, and we see
Right.
this all the time, where we have a tendency to get locked into those frameworks
Yeah.
and imagine that they're all encompassing, that they're somehow the truth. You know, they're like the final word on
Mhm.
on on whatever it is, our ideas of ourselves or someone in our life, or how to solve problems and
Mm,
so on. And then we 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 miss the reality, which is, as we've been saying in the whole conversation, that no, this, what's going on here is
right.
beyond
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
knowledge. And the more we can see that, I think the more we'll start to kind of still maybe use maps and interpretations to look at life and have perspectives, because that seems to be part of our experience as a
Mm,
human. And yet there's, I think, a natural kind of thing that begins to emerge,
mm.
where those frames of reference are increasingly held much more fluidly and
Right.
flexibly and lightly, because we recognize
Right.
the inherently limited partial nature of all frameworks. So I sometimes laugh when I hear people like, "Wow, you're really
Right.
so convinced of your point of view." That's hysterical. Like,
You're right.
you possibly know that you have the final
Mm.
answer to this, and yet, right? I mean, you listen to, if you turn on the news, you know, most nights, that's what you hear, is people being pretty certain of their point of view. It's like, I just kind of chuckle, because it's like increasingly seems laughable to me. It's like, what do you mean, sir? You're like, you're staring in the face, you're staring into the abyss of uncertainty. and and here, you know, you're trying to arrive at some degree of certainty, and it's just funny, but sometimes tragic too.
Oh, yes. Right. Do you think it has to do with fear?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, um, it seems like there's some pretty strong currents within us as organisms to feel like we want, like there's an impulse, like a desire to have certainty, about, well, just about anything. And but you know what I say to people with whom, when I'm working with them, it's like, okay, yeah, that's understandable, and I could, and as I start to open up an inquiry into just how unpredictable reality actually is, you know, it's not like, if you look at the whole coronavirus thing, it's not like suddenly life just became more uncertain and unpredictable. No, it's
Mm.
always that way.
It became more obvious now.
It
Yeah.
became more
Yeah.
obvious, exactly,
Right. Right.
because we don't know. You and I don't know, the next breath going to come to us so that we can continue this conversation. We have no idea. That's the truth. We just don't know. Yeah, we don't know the next moment. We never do. And so that might, at first, you know, glance, feel like an overwhelming thing to let in, you know, like, because of those impulses we have for knowledge and certainty and security. But actually, it's what we can really bank on. You know, if you want to bank on something, if you want to find a ground, which is a natural impulse, the ground is this groundlessness, this uncertainty, this ambiguity, this, that's the ground. And that's actually solid. Like, you can count on that. The other ground is, you think is secure and safe and certain, is actually really flimsy, because it doesn't hold up. But the other ground, the groundless ground, that holds up. So you can count on that one.
Wow, that's a great way of saying that. That's true. Because that ground that you speak of, the one that's boundless, it holds everything. It has everything in it. It's all there is, really. There's nothing else. That brings me into that question about suffering, because this is something that I know it's most caused by our concepts, what we believe in. But then there's also physical suffering when we are, a body that's dying of, I don't know, chronic disease, suffering with chronic pain and all that. Do you think that this understanding would help them somehow with physical pain?
Yeah, yeah, no, I mean, I think it certainly can. I mean, I've experienced, you know, my own life, you know, both, you know, what I could call physical pain, or more kind of psychological kinds of pain that, um, when we just bump up against something that we find, you know, difficult, uncomfortable, painful, and so on, it seems to be part of life, and maybe an inescapable part of being seemingly embodied creatures. I don't know, but let's just say we're all quite familiar with that experience. And um, so yeah, so I mean, there's a chapter in my book which was one of the last chapters that I wrote, and I'm glad that I did, and it came out of a conversation I was having with a friend who, when they read an earlier draft, they felt like it feels like you're somehow denying, human suffering, like the existence of suffering. And I said, oh, okay, I better address that. So I wrote a kind of a mock dialogue that I was having with her, imagining having with her around that question of, what is suffering? Is suffering real? Because as we're talking earlier, you look at any phenomena and you give it a label, and then I'm suggesting that when you explore what that is that you've labeled and defined, you can't actually find you can't define it actually. In a sense, it's not really a thing. And so, but the paradox is that it's like living sort of with simultaneous realities, or simultaneously true perspectives in a way. Because from one perspective, like, and I tell a story of in the book, in that chapter, where I was dealing with some unbelievable like wrist pain that was, I don't know, it was some tendonitis. I don't know what it was, but I was like on my knees. It was so painful, and I finally ended up taking, I think it was prednisone for it, just for like a couple of weeks, because I was just out of my gourd. Like, it was so painful. So, but in the midst of that, there was my experience, which was, it was very prominent in my experience, was that those sensations that I could call pain, that I had an opportunity to explore, just as I was describing earlier, like, well, what is this actually? Like, what is this phenomena that I'm labeling pain? And so it was this very curious thing, because I would feel into what it was, in a sense, like explore it experientially. And it's the same thing that I always find, which is I can't find it. I can't get to the bottom of what it is. Like, oh, there it is. It's pain. I understand what it is now. It's like, no, I just keep going deeper and deeper, and it's just like fathomless, bottomless well of infinity, what I never quite get to the bottom of. And that is very freeing, to touch into that perspective on what we could call, human pain or human discomfort, is to also realize it simultaneously with, like, oh yeah, this really hurts like hell from one perspective. From that other perspective, it's like, I don't even know what it is. And it changes, often in profound ways, the whole sense of like navigating that discomfort and feeling a sense of, it's as if you're less sort of, it doesn't necessarily diminish the discomfort, but it just changes it. And I've seen the same thing with, really like deep states of grief and loss, where you do the same exploration, and it's like, that's a real thing. It's a real human thing. You lose something that you love or value, a relationship ends, or someone passes away. And it's like, yeah, that's like a nitty gritty human phenomena of like, this thing that I so value and so love is now gone. And so you're experiencing, let's say, grief and loss and heartbreak or whatever. And yeah, that's an experience. And then you have this opportunity to look and see, well, what is that actually? Like, what is, I say in my work, what is experience, any experience that we're having and labeling in one way or the other? What is it made of? Like, what's the substance of, what's the, in the same way that the substance of matter is, atoms and subatomic particles and so on down the quantum, wormhole. What are the particles, if you will, of experience? Like, it's the greatest ecstasy or the most terrible grief. Like, what what is that actually? It's just an extraordinary, I mean, to me, it's just such an obvious question, such an astonishing question, and such a liberating question to ask ourselves. Like, what is this? What is this? And so then you can discover the ways in which these human experiences that can sometimes feel just completely overwhelming to us, again, from that one, you could say, human perspective. From another perspective, are, if I put it in theological terms, are none other than divinity, none other than the absolute reality, God. And because they're made of whatever everything is made of. They're made of pure, inconceivable mystery, like everything's.
Yeah, I like that word a lot, mystery. Yeah, it is a mystery. And a question came to mind about, do you ever think or try to imagine what this whole experience is about, like how it happened, like why and why? Why does it have to be this way? Why do we have to be in a human body, be aware that we are here now and suffer, yeah, physically, have the pain and all? Like, do you ever ask that question to yourself?
I totally understand the question, and but somehow it doesn't seem to occur for me. Can't say why exactly, but it's sort of like there's just a sense, I think, increasingly in my life of, things can't be any other way than the way that they are. And you could say, like, why is life this way? Why is what we think of as human existence and the human experience and incarnation, or whatever we want to call it, why is it this way? Why? And it is this way because it's the nature of life to be this way, clearly. Which is why it is. It's like if you were to say, why you look out my window right now at some trees, and it's like, well, how come the tree is growing that way? Because it is its nature. It's its nature to grow that way. Obviously, but beyond that, I mean, probably not a satisfactory answer. But why do humans get confused and experience all the things that they experience that can be difficult? It would appear that it is reality or life's nature to do that, to sort of, you could say, kind of miss itself, seemingly, to maybe not recognize itself fully, and then go on a search for itself in all the ways that humans search for the different things that they search for. And it just seems to be the nature of life that it operates that way. Because here it is.
Right. But when we ask, like I often ask a lot of questions, but I do because, and it feels sometimes like it's very much like it's non-existent asking questions. Like, what is existence? What is all this here? So it's coming from a place of non-existence. Why would I ask these questions?
I don't know. I mean, it seems like there's also, I don't know, it seems like one of the almost primal qualities of reality or life is a kind of a curiosity, like a kind of, I mean, you see it, I've had kids before, but I have a daughter, and, it was very obvious at the very beginning of her life that she came into the world, curious. And that was like her nature, was curiosity. And it seems to be the nature of children. And what are they asking? They're looking at phenomena. They're going, what is this?
Oh, wow. So
why
this
is
this? It, because they yet don't
know.
know. They are still learning about this reality. So they are in that space of not knowing anything, of non-existence, and then they're questioning existence.
I think it's almost whether the questions that we're framing are more, let's say, conceptual or intellectual kind of curiosities, or experiential curiosities, like I want to taste this kind of food, or experience this kind of sexual experience, or experience this kind of music, or experience this moment in nature, or it's endless, right? It's like maybe it's a similar thing. Maybe it's a similar kind of curiosity of that life has. Um, it's like it's as if life or reality is like it's like an experience junkie. It just wants to experience all of this because here it's having this experience. Like, not to anthropomorphize it too much and say somehow that it's wanting somehow to have all of this experience, but in a sense it's like it's definitely having experience. And there's a sense, at least on my end, I'm sure you can appreciate this too from your explorations, that it's like this just seems to be happening, like it has a will of its own somehow. It's like it just I mean, it's here it is. It's having, like, we could say, like, you and I, for example, like, we as people, as individuals, had desire to have a conversation with each other, which fueled the conversation we're now having, right? That would be one way of explaining why we're having this conversation. It was a desire, an impetus, curiosity. But it's impossible to explain, like, where that desire is, like, where's your desire to talk coming from? Like, what's the root of that? And where my desire to say yes to the invitation to have a conversation, where did that come from? It's like, I could try to explain it, but that would be a joke, because I can't really explain. It comes from,
Yeah.
who knows where it comes from.
Yeah.
It comes from life itself, because it, like I said, it's life's nature to have desire and have these be moved in the ways that it's moved. And I mean, it's just
Wow, yeah,
something,
it is
huh?
something. It is something, I mean, incredible. We don't have words for it. It's just, but it can be felt. That's amazing. This was an unconventional interview because I didn't ask any of the questions that are pretty much that I had programmed. and but, True. But I have one last question about this is about a word. What is love to you?
So funny, earlier when you said you said I was reading your mind about freedom, because you kept thinking about freedom, and then I started talking about freedom. Well, I was almost said, but then I kind of held back, as we were talking about, like, where everything's coming from and the mystery of that, desire and impulse and all these arisings that, we're partaking of. I was just feeling that, and what I was feeling was what I might describe as love. And it feels like, I'm just kind of feeling, well, what is that actually? It's like, I feel like one of the qualities of existence, life, reality is it's all inclusive. Nothing's excluded from it because it is everything. So it's all inclusive, right? And that, in a sense, is I think a good way of understanding love. It's this kind of radical inclusivity of everything, like a radical kind of embrace of everything.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know why radical. It's just normal to me.
Radical in the sense of, I love that word because it actually means, at the root, that's what radical means, But,
right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I love that answer. I have to use the same word.
Yes.
Love. Beautiful answer. So my last question. If you knew you would die soon, meaning losing the body, would you change anything or do anything differently?
I don't know what I would do. I mean, I can play the thought experiment and wonder what I might do if I knew I only had a few minutes left to live. I can imagine, speaking as we are about what we're talking about is about as near and dear to my heart as anything, because it feels so close to the bone of what's most kind of basic and fundamental about our experience here. And so it ignites something in me to speak about it, and it fills me in a certain way, in a nourishing way to to explore it with another, as you and I are doing. And so I can imagine, just doing that if I didn't have much time left.
That's a good answer too. That's an interesting answer, actually, very interesting. What are 3 things about this, what we call life, you know for sure?
I know for sure that something is present, and that's about it. I don't know what it is. I only know that it is. And that seems self-verifyingly undeniable that something is here.
Yeah, thank you for your presence. I think can I use a word even to describe,
Yeah.
but I appreciate your presence. I really appreciate your presence, John.
Well, the feeling's mutual. Yeah, it was a total pleasure to explore a little bit of this with you. So thank you for the invitation.
And my last technical question, where can we find more information about you, your books, products, services, and future projects?
Probably my website's probably the easiest. It's just my name, johnaston.com. And I'm also on social media, Instagram. My handle on social media is This Is Always It.
I love that too.
This is always it. Kind of sums it up.
Yeah, right. That's so simple. At the same time, so complex. And so fascinating, everything else in between. Thank you so much again, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you, Valeria.
Thank you. Bye for now, John.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. To learn more about John Aston, please visit his website, www.johnaston.com.
To learn more about this podcast, please visit fitforjoy.org/podcast. I want to thank the Patreon members, Lawrence McGrath, Mark Basden, Terry Clayton, and Aidan Vickrock. Thank you again for listening, and bye for now.